Wake up.
We all know about the Syria attacks. You recognize this little boy right here? The so-called Syria attacks, where Assad supposedly gassed his own people, right? Here's this little boy right here on the right, perfectly healthy. Well, this is 2 days later after supposedly he was attacked with chemical gas. The little boy sits here and testifies, you're going to see the video evidence, sits here and testifies that he was coaxed to go to the hospital because he thought there was food being handed out. And when he come in the door, they grab him and they start pouring water on his head and shooting spray in his mouth and stuff. And they're doing that to all the kids. They tricked these people to go there, and then they used them, made it look like, in a chaotic situation, made it look like that there had been some kind of chemical attack. The little boy says that he was fine. His father, who showed up there shortly after they filmed this whole setup, says that he's fine, and it was all a hoax. It was all absolutely a hoax. And check it out for yourself. But this is what is being fed to you by your government. And then they went over there and blew this country up, blew up all kinds of places over there. Over what? A complete lie, a complete hoax, just like I said from the beginning. An absolute hoax. You still like Trump? You still believe he's not one of them? You still believe that any of these guys aren't nothing but absolutely evil and need to be thrown out, to say it lightly. Check this out.
These are harrowing scenes. Panic, fear, terror, soaked, trembling children, screaming adults, and strange as it may seem, many of them had no idea about what was going on.
We were in the basement. My mother told me that we had run out of food and wouldn't have anything to eat until tomorrow. I heard noise outside. Somebody was shouting that we had to go to the hospital, so we went there. When I came in, some people grabbed me, started pouring water over my head.
11-year-old Hassan Diab was one of the apparent victims in the White Helmet's video. Here he is after being drenched and sprayed. He was found in Duma and interviewed by a Russian war correspondent, Yevgeny Podubny. He's fine, if a little confused.
That's me in the video, that's me. Yes.
As were many other kids. Any child would be terrified. Ergo, the panic, which the White Helmets were there to film. He was eventually found, though, by his father, who was none the wiser.
I didn't hear anything about a chemical attack. I was outside, but I didn't notice anything. I heard that my family was in the hospital.
It does make sense. A poisonous gas would be invisible, you'd imagine. Everybody would want to take precautions, especially when you're hungry and they give out food at the hospital.
I went to the hospital, walked upstairs and found my wife and children. I asked them what had happened, and they said people outside were shouting about some smell and told them to go to the hospital. At the hospital, they gave dates and cookies to the kids.
One of the doctors, who was reportedly on shift at the time, seemed surprised by the sudden influx.
Some people come to here and wash people in water, and they said, chemical attack, chemical attack. We didn't see any chemical attack symptoms here.
The doctor and others did, however, say that some people came in complaining about difficulty breathing, which is common. When an explosion destroys a building, for example, there's a lot of dust, makes it difficult to breathe and especially affects people with asthma.
People from the White Helmets told us about the use of chemical weapons, but we saw no sign of that. If chemical weapons were used against those people, our medical staff would have also been affected.
We've sent a request to the White Helmets to comment on this, but have received no answer yet. What we have seen is more and more witnesses coming forward to say there was only panic and no evidence of chemicals.
We heard an explosion and somebody said it was a chemical weapon. We ran to where the noise came from and started pouring water over the people. But they seemed to be okay and then walked away without any help.
People got so confused. Somebody started pouring water over people's heads, saying there had been a chemical attack. I was at the spot with my wife and daughter, but none of us experienced any symptoms of chemical poisoning.
It's remarkable how these scenes convinced 3 countries to launch cruise missiles at Syria. Especially remarkable when you realize that so many of the people here had no idea about what was going on, only that someone shouted about chemicals.
These people who are orchestrating this will use anyone or anything and go to any length to fool you and to fool your friends and your families and fool your children into going into the military and going to fight and live and die in these fake orchestrated situations. It's all a stage. All of what you see going on television between all this stuff, it's all put on. Everyone is being duped. If you're watching a television on any form of a regular basis, you have a complete upside down and backwards view of the world. Now let's see what they told us. You seen what the little boy just told you? Now let's look again at what they told us and what they did over nothing but a lie. And people died because of those missiles being fired into Syria. People lost their lives. This wasn't just blowing up buildings or something. Look into it, you'll see what I'm talking about. People died. Now take a look at this.
President Trump ordering strikes on Syria.
American, British, and French warships and planes launching dozens of missiles targeting the Syrian regime's chemical weapons sites. Video from Syria overnight shows missiles lighting up that night sky. But this morning, Syrian state TV with defiant images of people in the streets, and they are celebrating.
President Trump addressing the nation overnight, calling the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad, quote, an animal. The U.S.-led strikes are in retaliation for a suspected chemical weapons attack Assad carried out against his own people, killing women and children. The video horrifying the world.
If you remember, the strikes, they come just about 1 year after President Trump ordered a first round of strikes after another chemical attack. So will this time be different? And how does the U.S. avoid getting pulled into a bloody 7-year civil war? We're going to have team coverage this morning, but we do begin with ABC's David Muir, anchor of World News Tonight, who's on the ground from Beirut. David, good morning.
Dan and Paula, good morning. As you know, President Trump addressing the nation shortly after 9 p.m. last night, telling Americans that U.S.-led precision airstrikes had begun over Syria with help from both the UK and from France, 2 of our strongest allies. They talked about these strikes being aimed directly at chemical weapons capabilities, the facilities in Syria where they believe these chemical weapons have been made. The president talking about the images the world saw of the children who suffered in agony, some of them not surviving. More than 40 died in that attack, talking about mothers and daughters gasping for air, and said this was the work. These are the crimes of a monster. Overnight, airstrikes lighting up the Syrian sky. American, British, and French forces launching a joint strike offensive, destroying 3 targets. Explosions could be heard across the region. A coordinated cruise missile attack from sea and air. Retaliation for that alleged chemical weapons attack 6 days ago. The military operation planned targets, chemical weapons facilities. They targeted weapons storage units so that there would be minimal civilian casualties. Syrian television reporting this morning that 3 civilians were harmed when missiles hit a military base in Homs. Overnight, President Trump underscoring the horror of the Syrian regime's chemical weapons attack on its own people.
The evil and the despicable attack left mothers and fathers, infants and children thrashing in pain and gasping for air. These are not the actions of a man. They are crimes of a monster instead.
Syrian state media this morning saying that the scientific research center in Barza, north of Damascus, and warehouses belonging to the Syrian army in Homs were among those targeted in the attack. There are conflicting reports coming in from both Damascus and Moscow as to the number of alleged U.S. missiles that were shot down before they could reach their targets. Supporters of the Assad regime this morning now dancing in the streets in Damascus, following Syria's response to the attacks. There is reaction this morning in Syria. Syrian television now saying that this was a cowardly terrorist attack only done for America to save face, and continuing to try to push that storyline that the Russians have proof that the Duma chemical attack is a, quote, masquerade. But as we heard from the Defense Secretary James Mattis overnight, he said 1 year ago in that airstrike in Syria, they clearly did not learn their lesson. This time, the U.S. military, he said, struck harder. Dan, Paula?
All right, David Meade reporting from the region. And shortly after the president's announcement, the nation's top military brass went before the cameras.
As David mentioned, we heard from the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, who has expressed concerns about America getting entangled in a wider war here. So let's go to ABC's chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz, who's covering that angle from Washington. Martha, good morning.
Good morning, Dan and Paula. The Pentagon response was swift and precise, with the Pentagon warning it could happen again. Just days after President Trump warned that smart missiles would be launched into Syria, the president gave the order.
A short time ago, I ordered the United States Armed Forces to launch precision strikes on targets associated with the chemical weapons capabilities of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad.
The president also pointing the finger at Iran and Russia for their staunch support of the Syrian regime.
To Iran and to Russia, I ask, what kind of a nation wants to be associated with the mass murder of innocent men, women, and children?
But Russian and Iranian assets were not targeted, the U.S. hoping to avoid any escalation beyond the borders of Syria. The Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff made clear these strikes targeted only chemical weapons infrastructure and were done with great care.
The strike was not only a strong message to the regime that their actions were inexcusable, but it also inflicted maximum damage without unnecessary risk to innocent civilians.
Last year's strike with 59 cruise missiles was aimed only at a Syrian airfield, but despite the damage, was back in operation just days later.
Clearly, the Assad regime did not get the message last year.
Mattis said this strike used more than double the number of missiles used last year, and if Assad attacks his people with chemical weapons again, the U.S. will again be prepared to strike.
Right now, this is a one-time shot, and I believe that it sent a very strong message to dissuade him, to deter him from doing this again.
But this is it for the punishing airstrikes for last week's deadly chemical attack. Mattis, as you heard, calling it a one-time shot. So only if Assad uses the chemical weapons again will the U.S. respond.
Okay, so Martha, Putin is responding, defiantly saying that this attack was a clear violation of the UN. He's even denying that there was a chemical attack last week, claiming that it was staged. Should we expect Russia to retaliate?
They've been denying it all along. I think you will hear lots of huffing and puffing from Russia, but they don't want this to escalate any more than the U.S. does. And in the end, this missile strike was not anywhere near what it could have been. And while the U.S. did not let Russia know what they were targeting last night, unlike last year, they did have that deconfliction line open, telling the Russians where they would be operating last night. Dan and Paul.
Nobody wants this to escalate. Martha, thank you.
So you see, all a big sham. Does it make you just pissed off? Does it just disgust you? Does it make you angry?